Hello and welcome to today's story. My name is Philip, and here I share some of the scariest tales from across Asia. If you have a story you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always take the time to read them. But for now, let's get into tonight's episode. This time, we'll uncover 3 terrifying stories from across Asia, each one darker than the last. The first takes us down a lonely road in South Asia, where travelers whisper about a woman so beautiful she could stop you in your tracks. But if you dared to follow her, you would notice something impossible. Her feet were facing the wrong way. Those who kept walking after her never came back the same. Some were found days later in the forest, their bodies twisted, their tongues blackened, their blood drained, as if something had pulled the very life from them. This is the story of the Churel, the backwards-footed wraith. On the outskirts of a small village in northern India, there was a man who often traveled late at night for work. His name was Rakesh, and his job was simple but demanding. He delivered supplies between villages, sometimes riding his motorcycle along dark, empty roads that cut through forests and abandoned fields. For him, the night was nothing unusual. He had grown used to the silence, the distant sound of crickets, and the hum of his engine beneath him. But one evening felt different. The air was heavy, still in a way that pressed against his chest. Even the forest around him seemed quieter than usual, as if it was holding its breath. He had heard the warnings before. Old men in tea stalls spoke about the Churel, a spirit that wandered lonely roads and forests. She was said to appear as a stunning young woman, her beauty enough to make any man forget where he was going. But if he followed her too closely, he would see her secret. Her feet bent backwards, her face slowly rotting into something no human could bear to look at. Rakesh never paid much attention to such tales. He believed they were stories meant to keep children from wandering too far from home. But as he pushed further into the darkness, he began to wonder. His headlight cut a narrow path through the mist rising from the earth, and shadows seemed to stretch and bend unnaturally across the trees. The further he drove, the more he felt as though something unseen was watching him, keeping pace with his every move. He had a simple purpose that night: deliver the goods, reach the next village before sunrise. Yet the road seemed longer than ever, each bend drawing him deeper into isolation. He tried to shake the unease by humming a song under his breath, but even that seemed swallowed by the silence around him. The stars above were dim, hidden behind low clouds, and the moon barely lit the way. Still, he pressed on. After all, he told himself, what could really be out there besides animals and the wind? But deep down, he felt a tension that refused to fade. Every rustle in the trees, every flicker of shadow in the corner of his eyes, made his grip on the handlebars tighten. The night was no longer ordinary. Something was waiting. Something was near. And soon, he would realize that the stories whispered at those tea stalls were not just myths, but warnings. Warnings that he was about to ignore. Rakesh's motorcycle roared softly against the empty stretch of road, the headlight cutting a thin path through the mist. For a while, it was only him, the trees, and the occasional cry of a night bird echoing in the distance. Then something shifted. Up ahead, where the forest opened into a bend, he saw her. At first glance, she seemed almost unreal. A young woman standing on the side of the road, her sari flowing gently in the night breeze, her hair spilling down her shoulders like strands of midnight. She wasn't waving, she wasn't crying out. She was simply there, as if waiting. Rakesh slowed down instinctively, his heart kicking against his ribs. It was unusual to see anyone here, especially at this hour. No homes, no tea stalls, no villages for miles. His first thought was that maybe she was lost or in trouble. but something about her posture made him hesitate. She didn't seem distressed. She didn't even move closer when his motorcycle crawled near. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if acknowledging him, her expression unreadable in the dim glow of his headlight. He pulled the bike to the side, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was sharp, almost oppressive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He noticed the way her sari looked almost too clean for someone out here, the fabric glimmering faintly as though it reflected a light that wasn't there. Her face was soft, delicate, the kind of beauty that caught the eye instantly, almost unnaturally perfect. "Are you all right?" Rakesh asked cautiously, his voice sounding small against the emptiness of the road. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she turned, walking a few steps deeper into the trees that lined the roadside. It was slow, deliberate, as though she expected him to follow. She glanced back once, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles, before she disappeared just beyond the edge of the forest. Rakesh's throat went dry. He stood there, caught between common sense and curiosity. He had heard these stories before, men lured away by women in the night, never to return. But in that moment, those tales felt far away, like the kind of things you laugh about over tea. And yet, his instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. He stepped closer to where she had stood, shining his phone's flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Only shadows, branches, and the shifting glow of mist between the trunks. But then, faintly, he heard it. A sound that made his skin prickle. Footsteps. Not the hurried kind of someone escaping danger, but slow, rhythmic, as if pacing just out of sight. "Hello?" he called, his voice louder this time. Silence. Then, another faint shuffle, followed by what sounded like a soft, breathless laugh. It wasn't loud, but it echoed strangely in the forest, as if bouncing from tree to tree. He felt his pulse race, his mind grasping for reason. Maybe it was a villager, maybe someone playing a prank. But who would be out here at this hour, dressed like that? And why did it feel as though the sound wasn't just ahead of him, but circling him, closing in? Rakesh took a step back, his hand tightening around his phone. That was when he saw it. A single footprint pressed into the dirt near the roadside. At first, he barely noticed, but then his eyes adjusted, and he felt the blood drain from his face. The print wasn't facing into the forest where the woman had gone. It was facing the road, toward him, and yet the heel was in the front, the toes pointing backward. A chill tore through him, and suddenly the silence of the forest felt heavier than ever before. Whatever this was, it wasn't someone in need of help. It wasn't someone lost. It was something else. And he had already let it notice him. Rakesh's breath grew shallow as he stared at the footprint, backwards. The dirt still looked fresh, as though it had been pressed into the earth only moments before. His flashlight beam shook in his hand as he scanned the ground, finding more prints leading into the forest. Each one was the same heels where toes should be, toes where heels should be. He staggered back toward his motorcycle, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But as he reached for the handlebars, something caught his eye. In the beam of his headlight, the woman reappeared, standing just a few meters down the road. This time, she wasn't motionless. She was closer than before, her head tilted again, her smile wider, almost unnatural. Rakesh froze. He hadn't heard her return. No footsteps, no movement, just suddenly there, as though she had stepped out of the night itself. He gripped the key, ready to start the engine. But then he heard something else, another sound layered into the night. A voice, old, raspy, urgent. It came from somewhere behind him, across the road. "Don't look at her. Don't follow her." Rakesh whipped around, the light catching a frail figure crouched behind a tree. An old man, his clothes worn and ragged, his face lined deeply from years of hardship. His eyes were wide, filled with something more than fear desperation. "Get on your bike," the man hissed, waving his hand frantically. "Leave before she takes you." But Rakesh didn't move. His body felt caught in the pull of two forces, the alluring woman ahead of him and the urgent stranger behind. The woman took a slow step forward, and though the mist concealed the ground, he knew her feet still faced the wrong way. Her beauty seemed to glow unnaturally in the night, her skin flawless, her eyes locked on him with a hunger that felt far older than she appeared. The old man muttered something under his breath, words Rakesh couldn't quite hear, but they sounded like a prayer, sharp and hurried. He snapped a twig in his hand and tossed it into the brush. The moment it hit the ground, the woman's smile faltered. Her head turned sharply toward the sound, her long hair swinging like a curtain. Rakesh felt his chest tighten. He couldn't explain it, but the twig snapping seemed to have broken something in her illusion. Her figure wavered for a second, like a flame in the wind, before solidifying again. Her eyes now looked darker, sharper, the beauty of her face carrying an undertone of rot just beginning to surface. "Go!" the old man shouted, his voice louder this time. "If you stay, she'll drink you dry." The woman's smile vanished. She stepped closer, and for the first time, Rakesh saw the edges of her mouth pull back further than they should, as if her face was beginning to split at the corners. The sound of her bare feet on the road echoed unnaturally, each step backwards, yet moving forward toward him. Rakesh's hand shook on the ignition. The old man kept whispering prayers, louder, faster, as though his words were the only thing holding her back. The forest seemed to bend with the weight of it all, the mist thickening, the shadows leaning closer. He realized then that he was no longer just a traveler passing through the night. He was caught between a predator and a warning, and whichever choice he made would decide if he lived until morning. Rakesh's fingers trembled as he twisted the ignition, but the engine sputtered weakly and died. A hollow silence swallowed the road, broken only by the unnatural rhythm of footsteps drawing closer. The woman was no longer smiling. Her lips had peeled back, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too many, her once perfect face rippling at the edges as though something rotten was pushing through her skin. Her feet, unmistakably backwards, slapped against the earth as she moved, each step pulling her closer even as the motion made no sense. Rakesh's body screamed to run, to flee, yet he was frozen, trapped between fear and disbelief. The old man behind the tree suddenly lurched forward, clutching a bundle of dried herbs in a clay pot that rattled with small stones. His voice broke into a chant, rapid and guttural, the kind of prayer that seemed older than words themselves. He scattered a handful of ash into the air, and as the gray cloud drifted between them, the woman shrieked. The sound was piercing, splitting the night like metal tearing apart. It wasn't the scream of a woman. It was layered, distorted, dozens of voices howling in unison. The trees shook with the force of it, birds exploding from the branches in panic. Rakesh clutched his ears, the sound drilling into his skull, and for a moment he thought his bones would crack under the pressure. The woman's beauty was unraveling before his eyes. Her skin sagged and split, revealing gray flesh beneath. Her eyes darkened into hollow pits, dripping black tears down her face. Her hair writhed as though alive, twisting into snarled ropes that whipped against the air. Still, she stepped closer. The ash cloud swirled but didn't stop her, only slowed her, like a predator annoyed but not deterred. She hissed, her mouth widening until it seemed impossible for a human face to stretch that far. "Do not look into her eyes," the old man shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his chant. He lit a small torch from a rag soaked in oil, flames flaring wildly as he swung it between himself and the creature. Rakesh stumbled backward, his heel catching on the edge of the road. His light flickered across the ground, illuminating more footprints pressed into the dirt, dozens of them. Some small, some large, all facing the wrong way. His stomach churned as the realization hit him this wasn't the first time she had walked this road. The creature let out another scream, its black tongue rolling from her mouth as she clawed toward the flame. For the first time, Rakesh saw hesitation in her movements, as though the fire was more than just heat. It was a barrier, a weapon she despised. The old man roared another prayer, louder this time, almost furious, and hurled the clay pot to the ground. It shattered, spilling what looked like red powder mixed with bone fragments across the dirt. The air instantly thickened, the smell acrid and metallic. The woman shrieked again, her form flickering, her once solid figure breaking into ripples like smoke caught in a storm. Rakesh stared in horror, the world tilting as his understanding shattered. This wasn't just a story told to scare children. This wasn't a rumor at a tea stall. The churl was real, alive, and hungry, and she had chosen him. In that moment, his fear deepened into something else, not just terror of dying, but the dawning realization that he had stepped into a world where every whispered myth might be waiting in the shadows, just beyond the reach of his headlights. The woman's form wavered in the torchlight, her face now a grotesque mask of decay. The old man didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on the torch and stepped closer to Rakesh, his voice dropping into a low, steady rhythm. You've seen her true shape now. You know what she island. Rakesh could barely find his voice. What is she? The old man's eyes glimmered in the firelight, sharp with urgency. Churl, the cursed one, a spirit born from betrayal and death. She was once a woman, wronged, abandoned, left to die. Now she walks the night, feeding on men who are foolish enough to follow her beauty. He spat into the dirt. That beauty is a mask. Behind it, only hunger. Rakesh's skin crawled as the words sank in. He thought of the warnings he had overheard, stories told by old men with hushed voices. Don't follow a woman alone on the road. Don't be fooled by a face too perfect. At the time, he had laughed them off. Now every word pressed heavy against his chest. She drinks life, the old man continued, his chant softening into explanation. Not just blood. She takes the strength from your bones, the breath from your lungs, until you are left a husk. That is why men are found with black tongues and twisted bodies. She drains them until nothing human remains. The churl hissed, circling at the edge of the torchlight. Her face flickered between the girl she had appeared as and the corpse she truly was. Her backwards feet scraped against the road, leaving smears of dirt behind her. Why me? Rakesh whispered. She chooses travelers, the old man said grimly. Men alone, far from help. You stopped for her. You looked at her too long. Now she will not let you go. His words were harsh, but there was a weight of pity in them too. Rakesh's thoughts spun. He remembered the way she had first appeared, standing silently at the roadside, waiting. The soft laugh he'd heard in the Prabaltam forest. The footprint that faced the wrong way. Each moment, once confusing, now fell into place like pieces of a puzzle he wished he had never seen. The old man scattered more of the red powder across the road, and the churl snarled, retreating a step, her form flickering violently. These are bones of the dead, he said. They remind her of what she island. They weaken her mask. Rakesh swallowed hard, his heart hammering. The terror remained, but beneath it was a new clarity. This wasn't random. This was ritual. This was a hunt she had performed countless times before. The old man's voice turned sharp again. "You must leave now. If she follows, never stop. Do not look back. If you look into her eyes again, she will own you." The churl's shriek ripped through the night, louder than before, and Rakesh realized the truth. The road he thought was safe was nothing but a trap, and tonight he had stumbled straight into the jaws of something ancient and merciless. Rakesh's hands shook as he fumbled the key back into the ignition. This time, the motorcycle roared to life, the sound splitting the night like salvation. The old man swung the torch wildly, holding the churl back as she clawed at the edges of the firelight, her face twisting into something monstrous, her black tongue lashing the air. "Go!" the man shouted, his voice hoarse. "Now!" Rakesh didn't hesitate. He revved the engine, the tires spitting gravel as he sped down the road. The forest blurred into streaks of shadow, the mist whipping past him. He didn't dare look back, not once, but he could feel it, the weight of her presence chasing him, the echo of her scream following in the wind. The road stretched endlessly, and every bend felt like it would never end. His chest burned, his eyes watered, but still he pressed on, the memory of those backwards footprints etched into his mind. At last, faint lights from the next village appeared in the distance. Relief washed over him, but only for a moment, because just as he approached the first cluster of houses, he caught sight of something in the corner of his headlight. A woman, standing at the roadside, young, beautiful, smiling. Rakesh's stomach dropped. His hands tightened on the handlebars. Was it just another traveler, someone waiting in the night, or had she already found a way to get ahead of him? He didn't slow down to check. He knew better now. But deep inside, one question tore at him, refusing to fade. Had he escaped her, or had the churl simply chosen to let him go? The story of the churl is a chilling reminder that not every beautiful face on a dark road is what it seems. And while that tale belongs to the lonely highways of India and Pakistan, the night has many other dangers waiting across Asia. In some places, it isn't footsteps you should fear, but light itself. Travelers in the jungles of Indonesia whisper about strange glowing orbs floating between the trees. At first they look harmless, even mesmerizing, like lanterns swaying in the distance. But these lights are no guides. They are predators. They are Banaspati, the fire demons. And once they attach themselves to you, escape is impossible. The flames don't just burn your skin, they burn your soul. Oh, by the way, I wanted to let you know that tomorrow I'll be uploading a story about the scariest stories of Japan. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. On the island of Java, deep within the dense forest that seemed to stretch endlessly, there was a young man named Adi. He worked as a guide for travelers, often leading them along hidden trails known only to locals. Adi wasn't superstitious by nature, but he grew up hearing the stories. Tales of spirits that roamed the jungle, of curses older than the villages themselves. His grandmother always warned him never to wander too deep after sunset, for that was when the Banaspati drifted between the trees. Adi never believed much in such things. He considered them old legends meant to scare children into obedience. But on this particular night, he found himself alone in the forest, carrying supplies back to the village after guiding a small group of tourists earlier that day. His lantern flickered against the thick walls of leaves and tangled roots, throwing shadows that seemed to sway and stretch unnaturally. The air was damp, heavy, filled with a constant hum of insects and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures moving through the brush. The trail he walked was one he knew well, yet, in the dark, it felt different. The trees pressed in closer, the path seemed longer, and the silence between each sound grew heavier. Adi tightened his grip on the lantern, muttering under his breath to keep himself steady. He only had one goal: to make it home before midnight. That should have been simple. But with every step, a sense of unease grew, as if something unseen was waiting just beyond the reach of his light. He paused once to take a sip of water, wiping sweat from his brow, and that was when he thought he saw it. A faint glow flickering between the branches, far off the path. At first, he thought it was a firefly, but the light didn't blink, and it didn't move like an insect. It hovered, it floated, and then it was gone. Adi shook his head and forced himself to keep walking. He told himself it was nothing, just a trick of the eyes, a reflection from his lantern. But still, his pace quickened. The forest was alive with sound, yet beneath it all, he felt something silent, something watching. He didn't know it yet, but that faint light was no illusion. It was the beginning of a nightmare. A nightmare his grandmother's warnings had tried to protect him from, one that could burn a man from the inside out. Adi's steps quickened, the glow of his lantern bobbing nervously as he moved through the narrow trail. The night air pressed against him, thick and suffocating, filled with the drone of crickets and the distant cry of owls. He tried to keep his focus on the path, but his mind kept circling back to that strange light he had seen among the trees. It wasn't just the glow that unsettled him. It was the way it lingered, almost waiting, before vanishing into the dark. Fireflies came and went in erratic bursts of light, but this had been steady, patient, deliberate. A branch snapped somewhere behind him. He froze, turning sharply with his lantern raised. Only shadows stared back, shifting with the leaves. He forced a laugh under his breath, trying to calm his racing pulse. "Just the jungle," he muttered. "Just the jungle." But then, ahead of him on the path, it appeared again, a soft, flickering ball of light, hovering just above the ground. It wavered gently, as if carried by an invisible breeze. Adi blinked hard. For a moment, he thought it might be another traveler with a torch. But the shape was wrong. Too small, too round, and without any sign of a body holding it. He stepped closer, heart hammering in his chest. The glow shifted back, deeper into the trees. He stopped, frowning. The path home went straight ahead, yet the light seemed to be guiding him elsewhere, pulling him off the trail. Adi remembered his grandmother's warnings then. Never follow the lights. Never trust what glows in the dark. She had spoken of Banaspati, the fire demons said to lure men into the forest only to burn them alive from within. He had always dismissed her tales as superstition, but now, staring at the floating light, he felt her words pressing heavily against him. Still, part of him resisted the fear. Perhaps it was only a trick of the jungle. Swamp gas, he thought, or some strange reflection. Anything was better than believing the old stories. He tightened his grip on the lantern and continued forward, ignoring the glow at the edge of his vision. Yet no matter how far he walked, the light followed. Sometimes ahead of him, sometimes to the side, sometimes flickering faintly behind him. Always there, always watching. At one point, he stopped abruptly, determined to catch it in the act. He swung the lantern in wide arcs, the beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, the jungle revealed nothing but tangled roots and twisting branches. Then, without warning, the light appeared directly in front of him. Adi stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. It hovered just a few feet away now, close enough to bathe his face in an eerie orange glow. The air around it shimmered with heat, though no flame touched the ground. His skin prickled, his chest tightening as if the air itself was turning heavier, and then, just as suddenly, the light darted upward, vanishing into the canopy with a streak of fire. Leaves crackled faintly in its wake, glowing embers falling to the ground before winking out. Adi's lantern shook in his hands, the flame within it struggling against the humid air. He told himself again that there had to be an explanation, but the words sounded hollow even inside his own head, because deep down he knew that light wasn't natural, it wasn't harmless, and it wasn't finished with him yet. Adi tried to steady his breath as he pressed forward, but the jungle felt different now. The familiar path seemed foreign, twisted in the shifting glow of his lantern. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound too sharp. His skin still tingled from the heat that had rolled off the floating fireball, and no amount of rational explanation could ease the chill crawling up his spine. He forced himself to keep walking, eyes fixed straight ahead, but the jungle had other plans. The glow returned. This time not one, but two orbs flickered into view between the trees. They hovered in silence, pulsing faintly like beating hearts. Adi stopped dead, sweat rolling down his temple. The lights drifted closer, weaving lazily around each other as though circling prey. He staggered back, raising his lantern as if its weak flame could somehow protect him. That was when he heard a voice, faint at first, carried on the wind. "Leave offerings." At the edge, the words were broken, whispered, almost drowned out by the hum of insects. Adi spun, searching for the source, and there, standing on the far side of the path, was an old woman. Her figure hunched, her shawl tattered, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the orbs. She leaned heavily on a walking stick, her thin frame trembling as though the effort of standing was nearly too much. "Offerings," she repeated, her voice a rasp. "Banaspati does not forgive unless it is fed." Adi's throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The woman only shook her head, eyes darting nervously toward the orbs. "You should not be here. The forest is not safe tonight. Leave something behind, or it will take you instead." Before Adi could respond, the orbs suddenly flared brighter, their light surging like fire stoked by unseen hands. The air thickened with heat, the leaves around them curling at the edges. Adi felt his chest tighten, each breath burning like smoke filling his lungs. The old woman shrieked, clutching at her shawl as though shielding herself. She staggered backward into the trees, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared, her stick clattering to the ground. Adi rushed forward instinctively, but when he reached the spot, she was gone. Only the stick remained, lying across the dirt path. He lifted it with trembling hands, his lantern light flickering across strange carvings etched into the wood, symbols he didn't recognize, curling shapes that seemed to writhe when the light touched them. The orbs floated closer still, their glow now steady, their heat oppressive. Adi could feel sweat dripping from his skin, his clothes clinging as though he was standing near an open flame. The carvings on the stick seemed to pulse faintly in his hands, and for a brief moment, the orbs hesitated, their movement faltering. It was only a moment, but enough for Adi to understand this was not just light. It was something alive, something with purpose, and the stick in his hands might be the only thing keeping it from consuming him completely. But how long could it hold back fire itself? The air around Adi rippled with heat, pressing against his skin until it felt as though the forest itself was breathing fire. The orbs hovered in front of him, circling slowly, their glow brighter than any lantern. Each pulse of light seemed to thrum in his chest, syncing with his heartbeat, pulling it into an unnatural rhythm. Adi gripped the old woman's stick tightly, the strange carvings burning faintly beneath his fingers. He tried to steady himself, to believe it was only superstition, but then one of the orbs surged forward. It stopped just inches from his face, its glow flooding his vision. In that instant, he felt it something brushing against his mind, forcing its way in. A whisper without words, a heat that wasn't just outside but inside, clawing at the edges of his lungs. He staggered backward, coughing violently. His chest burned, as though his ribs were lined with embers. He gasped for air, but every breath only stoked the fire. Panic clawed at him. Was this what his grandmother had meant? The Banaspati didn't only burn flesh. It burned from within, setting the soul itself alight. The second orb darted closer, circling his head like a predator closing in. Adi raised the stick, waving it wildly, and to his shock, the carvings flared with a faint red glow. The orbs recoiled slightly, hissing softly like fire doused with water. For the first time, Adi realized the stick wasn't just wood. It was a weapon, or maybe a warning, left for moments exactly like this. But the orbs were relentless. They surged forward together, and Adi felt the searing heat intensify. His skin prickled, his vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment he saw shadows flickering inside the flames, faces twisted and charred, mouths open in silent screams. His stomach lurched. Were those the souls of the victims the Banaspati had consumed? Were they trapped inside, forever burning? "Leave something behind," the old woman's voice echoed in his memory, "or it will take you instead." But what was he supposed to leave? He had nothing of value, nothing the demon would accept. His lantern sputtered weakly, its small flame nearly drowned by the heat radiating from the orbs. He could feel his strength fading, his knees trembling under the weight of invisible fire. Then, in a desperate act, he drove the stick into the ground. The carvings glowed brighter, sending a ripple of red light across the dirt path. The orbs shrieked an unnatural, piercing wail that vibrated through the forest. They flared violently, flames twisting into shapes that barely resembled human forms before collapsing inward on themselves. Adi fell to his knees, gasping, the air around him thick with smoke and ash. The forest went deathly silent. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. For a moment, he thought it was over, that he had somehow repelled them. But then, faintly, the glow returned. Not ahead of him this time, but deep inside his chest, a warmth that wasn't his own. His hands trembled as he realized the terrifying truth. The Banaspati hadn't left. It had touched him, and now it was burning from the inside. Adi clutched his chest, every breath searing like smoke in his lungs. The faint glow inside him pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, each throb spreading heat through his veins. He stumbled forward, desperate, gripping the carved stick as though it could draw the fire back out. But no matter how tightly he held it, the warmth inside didn't fade. It only grew stronger. The jungle seemed to lean in around him, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. And then he heard it again, a voice, soft but urgent, like a whisper carried on the leaves. "You carry?" The mark now. Adi spun, lantern light catching the figure of the old woman once more. She stood just beyond the edge of the path, her eyes fixed not on him, but on his chest. Her expression was grim, sorrowful. "It has touched you," she said, her words breaking with age. "Once Banaspati enters, it does not easily let go." Adi's throat tightened. "What do you mean? How do I stop it?" The woman shook her head slowly. "Banaspati is not just fire. It is hunger. It feeds on breath, on life itself. Those who are claimed burn from within until they are nothing but husks. The body may still move, but the soul is gone." She stepped closer, her staff pressing into the dirt. "That is why offerings are left at the forest's edge. Food, incense, small treasures. They are not to appease the dead. They are to keep the living safe from this curse." Adi staggered back, his mind racing. He thought of the travelers he had guided, of the strange disappearances whispered about in nearby villages. men who never returned from the forest. Others found wandering days later, their eyes hollow, their skin blackened. At the time, he had dismissed the stories as exaggeration. Now he knew the truth. Those men had been claimed. The woman's gaze darkened. If you survive this night, you will not be the same. The fire has seen you. It will follow you. And if you do not learn to keep it fed, it will finish what it has started. Adi's chest flared with heat, forcing a cry from his lips. For a moment, he felt as though something inside him clawed against his ribs, trying to break free. He fell to his knees, gasping, the lantern slipping from his hand. The flame sputtered and died, plunging him into darkness. When he looked up again, the old woman was gone. Only her voice lingered in the thick air, drifting like ash on the wind. Offerings may keep it away, but once it chooses you, escape is only an illusion. Adi's trembling hands pressed to the earth, the glow inside his chest, refusing to fade. Every story he had ignored, every warning he had laughed at, now stood before him in brutal clarity. He hadn't just seen Banaspati. He had become part of it. Adi stumbled through the forest, his chest glowing faintly with each labored breath. The heat inside him was no longer just pain. It was alive, shifting, growing stronger with every step. He clutched the carved stick desperately, but its light had faded, powerless against what had already taken root within him. The path opened at last, revealing the faint outlines of his village. Relief should have flooded him, but instead, dread crept deeper. What would they see when he walked back under the lanterns? A man returning from a long night in the jungle, or something else entirely. He reached the first cluster of huts, his body trembling, smoke curling faintly from the corners of his mouth. A dog barked violently in the distance, then whimpered and retreated. Adi's neighbors stirred at the sight of him, their faces pale, their whispers sharp. One child pointed with wide eyes. "He's burning," the boy murmured. Adi opened his mouth to speak, to cry out for help, but no words came. Only a thin wisp of fire slipped past his lips, flickering in the night air before vanishing. The villagers stepped back in fear, forming a circle, their eyes reflecting the glow that pulsed beneath his skin. And then, from deep within the forest, more lights began to flicker, dozens of them. Slowly drifting closer, as if answering his presence, Adi collapsed to his knees, his vision dimming, one final thought burning through his mind. Had he escaped the Banaspati, or had he become its herald? The fire demon of Java shows us that not every light in the darkness is meant to guide you. Some are meant to consume you. And yet, fire is only one face of hunger. Across the sea, in the northern provinces of China, there is another spirit whose craving is quieter, but no less deadly. They call her the hungry nun of Shanxi. She does not burn her victims, nor tear them apart. She simply asks for food at the gates of temples or along quiet roads. Refuse her, and she will follow you home, silent as a shadow. Days later, the curse begins not with fire, but with famine, striking a household from the inside until nothing remains but empty rooms and unanswered prayers. 2 stories done, and 1 to go. I hope you like the stories so far. When I make these long videos, there are nights where I stay up really late working on them. If you'd like to sponsor my coffees for those nights, I'd really appreciate it. Of course, you don't have to. I truly enjoy making these videos for you. But if you'd like to, there's a link below the video. In the rolling hills of Shanxi, where ancient temples stand weathered against centuries of wind and rain, a young merchant named Liang often traveled between villages. His route took him past the old temple gates on the outskirts of town, a place the locals treated with quiet caution. The temple itself had long been abandoned, its once red walls faded to gray, the statues inside worn smooth by time. Few dared to pass by after sunset, whispering that a restless nun still lingered at its gates. Liang, however, was a practical man. He sold grain, fabrics, and tools, things people needed to survive. Rumors of spirits never worried him. To him, the temple was simply a landmark along the road, a reminder that his journey was almost complete. And on this particular evening, the sky was already sinking into darkness when he reached its shadow. He had only one goal: to return home quickly, with the goods he carried safely intact. But as the last light drained from the horizon, the air around the temple grew unnaturally still. The usual chorus of crickets and night birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Liang tightened his grip on the strap of his satchel and kept his eyes on the road. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something watched him. The temple gates loomed tall beside him, their wood darkened with age, the faint carvings of protective symbols nearly erased. He remembered stories his grandmother once told, of a famine that had ravaged Shanxi generations ago, when even those sworn to silence and prayer had wasted away in hunger. Among them was a nun who, despite her devotion, had collapsed outside her own temple, begging for food no one could spare. It was said she never left. Liang shook the memory from his head, forcing himself to focus on the path ahead. He was no child, and he had no time for ghost stories. Still, he walked faster, each step echoing too loudly in the stillness. His lantern swayed in his hand, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to reach for him from the temple gates. All he wanted was to pass through the night without trouble. But the silence clung to him, thick and heavy, as though the darkness itself was waiting to speak. And when it did, it would ask only one question. Would he give, or would he refuse? Liang walked briskly, the temple now behind him, but the weight of its silence seemed to follow. He tried to shake it off, humming a tune under his breath, the way his father used to on long journeys, but his voice sounded thin, swallowed almost instantly by the night. The road stretched out ahead, empty and dark, yet he could not shake the sensation that he was no longer alone. Then he heard it, a soft shuffle of footsteps, faint, deliberate, keeping pace with his own. He froze, lantern raised, eyes scanning the road. Nothing. Just trees lining the dirt path, their branches arching like skeletal hands over the way ahead. He swallowed hard and started walking again. The footsteps returned. Liang's pulse quickened. He turned sharply, thrusting the lantern's glow behind him. And there she was. A woman stood near the edge of the temple gates. Her robes were tattered and dull, the once white fabric clinging to her thin frame. Her head was bowed, her hands folded neatly in front of her. At first glance, she looked no different from an ordinary nun, frail, humble, silent. But something about her presence pressed against the air, heavy and unnatural. Liang's throat went dry. He thought of his grandmother's stories, of the nun who had died of hunger outside this very temple. For a moment he considered running, but her stillness rooted him in place. Then, softly, her head lifted. Her face was pale, her cheeks hollow, eyes sunken deep into her skull. And yet, her expression was strangely calm, almost polite. When she spoke, her voice was little more than a whisper, but it carried clearly in the silence of the night. "Kind sir, may I have something to eat?" Liang froze. Her words were gentle, but his body reacted with instinctive dread. The stories came flooding back: the nun who asked for food, the curse that followed those who refused. He glanced at his satchel. Inside were bags of rice, dried beans, things he meant to sell at market. They weren't his to give freely. His customers depended on him. Still, he hesitated. Something in her eyes made it difficult to simply walk away. They were not angry, nor pleading. They were empty, bottomless, as though no amount of food could ever fill them. I have nothing for you, Liang said, his voice unsteady. I must bring these goods to the village. The nun tilted her head slightly, as though she had heard this answer countless times before. Then she nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile, though it held no warmth. Liang felt a chill race down his spine. He expected her to vanish, to dissolve into the mist like an apparition. But she didn't. She simply lowered her head again, folding her hands neatly, standing as still as stone. Uneasy, Liang turned back toward the road and continued walking, forcing his legs to move faster. His lantern swung wildly, shadows dancing across the trees. But after only a few steps, he knew. The sound of footsteps had returned, soft, steady, always just behind him. She was following. And though she said nothing more, the silence between them felt heavier than any words. The air seemed colder, the road longer, and deep inside, Liang understood the terrible truth. His refusal had not been forgotten. It had been accepted. And now, the nun would not leave him. Liang's pace quickened, his sandals scraping against the dirt road as he tried to put distance between himself and the figure behind him. But no matter how fast he walked, the footsteps followed. Slow, steady, deliberate. They never closed the gap, but they never faded either. Always there, just far enough to remind him he wasn't alone. His lantern flame flickered weakly, threatening to sputter out with each gust of wind. He cupped his hand around it, muttering curses under his breath. But the more he tried to focus on the road ahead, the more the silence pressed in around him. The sounds of the night crickets, owls, rustling leaves were gone. All he could hear was his own heartbeat and the dragging steps of the woman. Then, up ahead, a shape emerged on the roadside. Liang's chest tightened as he drew closer. It was another traveler, a man leading an old mule piled high with bundles of firewood. The man looked tired, but his eyes widened when he spotted Liang. He stepped into the middle of the path, raising a hand. "You passed the temple, didn't you?" the man asked, his voice urgent. Liang nodded quickly, relief flooding him at the sight of another living soul. "Yes, there was someone there. A nun, she—" The man cut him off sharply, his expression darkening. "Did she speak to you? Did she ask?" Liang hesitated. His stomach knotted. "She asked for food. I said no." The traveler's face went pale. He dropped the mule's rope, stepping back as though Liang himself had become dangerous. "Fool," he spat, his voice trembling. "She's with you now. Don't you hear her? Don't you feel her?" Liang's breath caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the man reached into his bundle and pulled out a small cloth pouch. He tossed it to the ground between them, scattering dried rice and a few shriveled berries onto the dirt. "Offer it," the man whispered fiercely. "Offer something before it's too late." But when Liang glanced over his shoulder, his blood turned cold. The nun stood just beyond the glow of his lantern. Her head was still bowed, her hands folded neatly in front of her, but her presence weighed on him like a stone. She didn't reach for the food. She didn't even look at it. The traveler's mule reared suddenly, eyes rolling white, braying in terror. The man grabbed its rope, panic flashing across his face. "She won't take from me," he said quickly. "Only from you. It's your debt now." Without another word, he tugged the animal into the trees, disappearing into the darkness, leaving the scattered offering behind. Liang's throat went dry. He stood frozen, the nun's shadow stretching longer with every flicker of his lantern. She hadn't moved, she hadn't spoken, but the silence told him everything. The food on the ground was not enough. Not anymore. Liang's hands trembled as he stared at the scattered rice and berries on the dirt road. The old traveler's words echoed in his ears. "It's your debt now." His lantern shook in his grip, the flames stretching long shadows across the trees. Behind him, the footsteps stomped. He forced himself to turn. The nun stood in the center of the road, no longer at a distance. She was only a few paces away now, her face illuminated in the trembling glow. Her hollow cheeks and sunken eyes were clearer than before, her skin pale as parchment stretched too tightly over bone. Her lips parted slowly, and in that same polite whisper, she asked again, "Kind sir, may I have something to eat?" Liang's throat closed. The offerings on the ground seemed pitiful in that moment, as though they had no weight at all against the hunger radiating from her. He knelt quickly, gathering a handful of rice in shaking fingers. "Here," he said, his voice breaking. "Take it, please, take it." But the nun didn't move. Her eyes followed his trembling hand, and then she shook her head gently, almost kindly, as though humoring a child. The gesture froze the blood in his veins. She wasn't refusing the food, she was refusing him. Liang's breath came in ragged gasps. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of fear. The nun's hollow eyes lifted, locking on his. For the first time, her expression shifted. The politeness faded, replaced by something deeper, darker. Her lips curled into a faint smile, but her teeth were broken, jagged, as though worn away by endless gnawing. She stepped forward. The air grew heavier with each of her movements. Liang staggered back, the lantern slipping from his grip and shattering on the ground. Darkness swallowed the road, save for the faint glow of her presence. Her shadow stretched impossibly long, curling across the dirt until it reached his feet. Then came the sound. At first faint, then louder groaning stomachs, echoing around him, though no one else was there. The sound of desperate hunger, of countless mouths crying out in unison. Liang clutched his ears, his knees buckling beneath the weight of it. The nun's voice cut through the chorus, sharp and clear. "You said no." Liang's chest seized. He looked around wildly, but there was nothing left. No traveler, no mule, only the nun and the hollow cries of the starving. Her figure flickered in the dark, shifting between the frail woman before him and something skeletal, her belly sunken yet distended, her skin stretched and cracking. His grandmother's warnings struck him like a blow. To refuse her was not to leave her hungry, it was to invite her into your home, to bring her famine with you. The realization sank like ice in his stomach. It wasn't just his life at stake. It was everyone waiting for him back in the village. His family, his neighbors, all of them. And with every step she took closer, he knew the hunger wasn't hers alone anymore. It was his to carry. Liang stumbled backward, the nun's hollow gaze fixed on him. Her voice still rang in his ears, soft yet merciless. "You said no." The chorus of phantom stomachs gnawed at his mind, endless groans of hunger rising and falling like a tide. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound came from within, vibrating in his very bones. And then, without warning, the noise stopped. The road was silent again. The nun no longer moved closer, though her shadow still reached him. She lowered her head slowly, folding her hands back into the same patient pose she had held at the temple gates. For a moment, she looked as though she was waiting in prayer, but the silence broke when her voice returned. "I was left to starve outside my temple," she whispered. "The faithful had nothing to give, and still I begged." She lifted her hollow face, her eyes glimmering faintly in the dark. Now I beg from others, and those who refuse share my fate. Liang's breath caught in his throat. The stories he had dismissed as superstition rushed back with horrifying clarity. Families struck by famine not caused by failed crops, but by something unseen. Children who wasted away despite food in their mouths. Villages abandoned when no one was left alive to bury the dead. It wasn't hunger of the body, it was hunger of the spirit, carried like a curse. You think your rice, your beans, your trade will save you? The nun said softly. No food can satisfy what I am. Once refused, I follow. I follow until your home is empty, until every bowl in your house is filled with nothing but silence. Liang's legs trembled, his body threatening to collapse under the weight of her words. He thought of his family, waiting for him at home. His younger brother, his aging parents. He had promised them safety, provisions, a future. Now, he realized, he had promised them a curse instead. The nun tilted her head slightly, as if listening to thoughts he had not spoken. Do not fear, she added with a strange softness. You will eat, you will drink, and still you will starve. Her figure began to fade then, the outline of her body melting into the night air like mist dissolving in the wind. But even as her form vanished, her presence remained. The silence pressed against Liang's chest, heavy and unrelenting, like invisible eyes watching every step he took. He staggered to his feet, the broken lantern at his side, nothing but shards of useless glass. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the dark, but he no longer feared for himself alone. He knew now what would happen. The footsteps he had heard were not hers chasing him. They were hers attaching to him. The nun did not need to follow. She was already coming home with him. Liang ran the rest of the road, his satchel thumping against his side, every step heavier than the last. The night air was cool, but his body burned as though fever had taken hold. When, at last, the faint lights of his village appeared in the distance, relief surged through him, brief, fragile, already cracking under the weight of what he carried. His younger brother was the first to greet him at the gate, waving eagerly. Liang tried to smile, but the gesture faltered when he saw his brother's thin frame, his innocent face. He thought of the nun's words, "Your home will be empty." That night, the family gathered around the table, bowls of rice steamed in front of them, the scent of fresh food filling the room. Liang forced himself to eat, to laugh, to act as though nothing had followed him home. But as the meal went on, he noticed something that froze his blood. His mother's hand trembled as she lifted her chopsticks. His father coughed weakly after each bite. His brother chewed slowly, his eyes already sinking, shadows blooming beneath them. The food was there, yet hunger clung to them like a second skin. Liang dropped his own bowl, the sound shattering the room into silence. His family looked at him with confusion, but he could see it already beginning. The curse was real. The nun was here. And in the quiet that followed, he heard it again. That low, endless chorus of stomachs groaning with emptiness. This time, it was not outside on the road. It was inside his own home. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Tomorrow, we will be uploading another horror story about Japan. Feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications to never miss another scary video. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.